Greetings, everyone, and happy spooky season. Welcome to Back to Ashes. I am your host, Phoenix. First and foremost, thank you to the elite members of the channel. Thank you for your support and your love to the channel and myself. I reciprocate the love and appreciate you more than you'll ever know. With that being said, it is now time to go back to ashes. For once we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and a happier person every day. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for your dose of vocal melatonin entitled True Creepy Halloween Stories. Right after this intro, there will be an ad. I'll read the first story, there will be an ad, and after that, there will be no more ads within this video. Halloween etched one of the deepest scars from my kid years in my memory. My pals and I had been pounding the pavement for treats, hitting every block we could hoof it to without collapsing. On the trek home, we meandered by this notorious spot that loomed large in local lore. For ages, we'd known about this creaky old place tucked into the adjacent suburb, snug against other properties, yet isolated by wild, tangled yards and a snaking gravel drive. No lights ever flickered on, no vehicles parked out front, no souls ever slipped out or in. We pegged it as some absentee owner's forgotten relic, but the real consensus? Total ghost central. At 13, you'd swear it was cursed. Hell, catch it now in your 30s and it still sends shivers, whispering of spectral squatters, straight out of a Addams Family fever dream. Crumbling spires, shadowed eaves, the works. So yeah, a pack of hyperactive teens bought hook, line, and sinker into tales of restless phantoms pacing the corridors. As we crept by, chatter died to a hush, all eyes glued to the eerie facade, until our friend Charlie braked hard, a devilish smirk splitting his face. "What's it worth in sweets if I rap on that entrance?" he tossed out. We figured he was bluffing hard. No shot he'd tango with that portal to the beyond. But Charlie upped the ante, wagering his full hull that he'd do it. Buzzkill vibes killed any takers. His eyes screamed dead serious about doorbell ditching the spook shack. I tossed in a palmful of loot, doubting him, and the other two piled on. Stakes locked, Charlie strutted that path like a gunslinger, us trailing his march with side-eye skepticism. At the threshold, he whipped around, feigning still nerves, but the driveway's length betrayed his jitters, shoulders tight, face a mass cracking at the edges. One of us muttered, "Knew you wouldn't," loud enough to echo. Charlie caught it, squared up, and bam! Fist met wood with a thud. A sharp inhale cut the air of our crew. Candy? Forgotten. This fool had assaulted a haunted threshold. We froze as he retreated a step, coiled like a sprinter, but silence reigned. No creak, no glow, just inky hush swallowing the knock. The void stretched and Charlie's spine straightened, ditching the retreat. He pivoted back, rapping harder the second go, drumming a cheeky beat. Tap, tap, pause, bang. Giggles bubbled up from us by then, mostly out of sheer gall. Spotting our hysterics fueled the fire. He hammered a third round, hollering, "Anybody in there?" Kid us cracked up, pent-up dread deflating into absurdity, proving our nightmare mill all hot air. Charlie amped it, bellowing threats. No specter handing out Halloween haul. He'd unleash pranks to haunt their afterlife. Next, vows of holy water baptism to exorcise the joint. We howled by the finale. "Okay, champ, you're golden. Claim your prizes. Let's bail," one hollered. "Nah, Charlie milked it, jigging across the stoop, belting the Ghostbusters hook. No fear of the ethereal. We doubled over, guts aching. Then, mid-cackle, my gaze snagged upward. The panel yawned wide behind him. Laughter choked off as he whirled, just in time for a hulking silhouette to barrel forth, seizing him in a vise. Charlie's yelp pierced the night, futile as the figure yanked him inward and barricaded shut. Dead quiet crashed back. That slam ignited us. We bolted the drive, baying his name in a frenzy. Gut-level drive to save him overrode sense, but the barrier held firm, bolted tight. Forcing entry elsewhere? Lunacy. Plan A. Summon backup. The pad's weird limbo status left a scatter of close neighbors. We hammered the nearest one's frame till a gruff grown-up flung it ajar, irritation morphing to alarm at our wild-eyed panic. Words tumbled in a jumbled roar, frantic pleas colliding. Our terror sold it. No mere costume beggars here. He dashed in, dialed emergency, barked at us to zip it, then grilled for a snapshot recap to feed the line. We jittered, imploring speed, but he shushed us for the radio chatter. We paced, his patch still wailed near, then surged to intercept the squad at the cursed curb, imploring intervention for our buddy. Officers charged the lane, ordering us rearward, then pounded the wood while we gawked. A pal spat. "Bust it down! He's trapped! Ram through!" Protocol stalled them. No breach on first pass. Agony clawed. We envisioned eternities ticking while Charlie suffered, dismissed as kid hysterics. We chorused demands from a storm-in rescue. They repeated the ritual. Authorities, open sesame. Torture, picturing untold horrors while they politely tapped like solicitors. Then, post-final wrap, the slab parted once more. A dude emerged, Charlie in tow. Distance muffled the exchange, but we clocked our pals' bobs and weaves to queries, stock still otherwise. It dragged a beat or two, us coiled for the takedown, cuffs gleaming. Zilch. No hardware flashed. More murmurs, and the man retreated to a new beaming foyer, sealing up. The pair approached. We gaped, brains shorting on the free pass. Nearing, an officer quipped. "Fortunate that resident stepped in for your pal. Could have gone south fast." Bewildered, we sputtered the snatch and drag truth. They waved it off as fibbled mischief, pegging us as grudge holders, stifed on snacks. Lightbulb. The fiend had spun a yarn. Fury boiled in one mate. He unloaded the timeline, dawned to drag. Charlie wheeled, snapping. "Ease up, man. Fabricating crap like that's lame." Shock number infinity hit, muting us to gawks. "What's your malfunction?" Our stares seemed to scream. Brass wrapped it. Scatter homeward, or next sighting meant escorted returns with parental grillings. Last straw. We slunk off, en route. The barrage. Spill what sorcery flipped you. Charlie caved, piecemeal. Pitch black maw at first. Agony twisting him. The brute wrung basics. Name, address, school. Vowing mercy for honesty. Only to probe deeper amid finger-crushing torment that shattered pain thresholds. Every secret spilled. Then the vow. Resurface or whisper of the innards? He'd torched the family nest mid-slumber. Why stonewall the badges? Lock up neuters, arsonists. Their reach? Everywhere. He echoed the threat. Risk too steep to test. We pressed. The forbidden glimpse? Earth flared. He still lips eternal. Fib, sorta. A few autumns on, chit-chat unearthed it. Still zipped tight on specifics, but the gist? Vile. Gut-wrenching foul. Even tween him grasped the kill's orders, logic. Denzians weren't mundane, nor benevolent. That clicked the terror authentic. We'd huddle sans him, sometimes. The eyewitness trio, mulling in whispers. Embellished? Nah. Charlie's straight arrow rep held. Tail unwrapped across decades. Plus, that sector? Poison to him. Shunned forever. Liar's fear wouldn't linger so. Drift happened post-high school. Divergent paths, splintering ties. I wised up on prying the veil. Curiosity? Eternal gnaw. That abyss he glimpsed? Monstrous enough to muzzle a lifetime's echo. The most terrifying moment for my kid days unfolded on All Hallows Eve. My crew and I were prowling for threats, zeroing in on that upscale pocket of the suburb where the home sprawled with endless lanes and we'd scoured king-size chocolate slabs the year prior. Pumped to raid in again before stocks vanished, we navigated clusters of 4 or 5 abodes at a stretch, skipping the quiet ones until lights and props signaled a payout. We bagged the loot at one stop, snagged another, then trekked a full stretch of sidewalk before spotting a gem that screamed hospitality. Dual jack-o'-lanterns flanked the entry, and the veranda, a full-on spectacle, dangling faux chiroptera from the overhang, gnarled faux vines coiling the posts, and the entryway swathed in synthetic spider silk. Prime setup. I braced for a hearty greeting in those coveted jumbo bars. What hit us instead? A bolt of panic that had us bolting and shrieking down the path. I jabbed the chime plate by the frame. Nada. No chime. Pegged it as one of those muted electronic buzzers audible only indoors. Still, no footsteps. So I chalked it up to a glitch and wrapped my knuckles instead. The panel creaked ajar on loose fittings, unlatched and ajar to the world. We traded baffled glances at the oddity. Then I thumped again, hollering, "Anybody around?" Crickets, save for the faint murmur of a screen flickering from within. The vibe shifted from quirky to unnerving. A pal urged, bailing. That prickling instinct hit me too. Wrong place, wrong energy, trouble brewing. Yet, curiosity clawed harder. I couldn't bail without a peek. Ignoring a mate's hissed, "What are you, nuts?" I eased the barrier wider with a tentative prod, voice echoing once more for signs of life. Fantasized a rushed host shuffling from the back, door half-forgotten post, last visitors. Reality? A glimpse of an elderly lady sprawled flat, nothing but her soles in view. My sidekick inhaled sharp, whispering if she was all right. Clearly not. I figured she'd checked out for good, until his murmur jolted her bolt upright, propped on her rear, gaze drilling past us like we were ghosts. That chill? Not the killer. What ignited the stampede? Lungs burning with wells? Crimson trickling from a nasty split at her brow's edge. paired with that gravelly guttural rasp as she fixed on our spot. The quickest to pivot bellowed, "Undead! She's a zombie!" at full volume. Blame the pint-sized panic, but for a heartbeat, my brain bought it, straight out of those shambling corpse flicks. Snap back, hit fast. No resurrection here, just a senior in dire straits, bleeding and dazed. Our zombie shouter was still ranting as we pounded the facing yard's gravel. I clamped his yap before the door cracked. Last thing we needed was a neighbor dialing badges over pranksters. The owner flung it wide. I blurted the crisis across the way, pleading for medics. He barked inside for his house to hit emergency. Then we surged back. She dragged herself to the steps by now, palm mashed to her scalp, staunching the flow. Semi-lucid, words tumbling clearer. The dude held her Helen, probing the mishap. A creep in baggy holiday garb, mask included, had clocked her skull with who knows what when she shooed him off at the threshold. Gratitude flowed for flagging help, and with a wry smile through the haze, she vowed to unload her surplus stash on us come tomorrow if we swung by. Reward for sharp-eyed Samaritans. We held her to it, bandage turban in place, hubby beaming appreciation. She forked over the goods. Relief washed over us all in the end. But back then, peak nightmare fuel. That cusp of awareness where optics screamed reanimated horror. But the psyche reeled from the raw terror of it, convinced I'd witnessed the grave's reversal. Pure dread. Hindsight clarifies the deeper gut punch. For those we've cherished, once they're truly parted, no encore awaits. Back in 1988, I was just 14 and living here in Leeds in the UK. I liked football. I liked my mom's shepherd pie. And I liked throwing sticks for our dog down at the park. Now, what I didn't like most people, was school. I couldn't stand it, in fact. But I had my best mate Danny to get me through the day there. Now, me and Danny used to get the bus together at the end of school. And no matter how much of a bad day I'd had, he'd always find a way to cheer me up. At least until one day when Danny was suddenly the one who needed cheering up. So, Danny was a good lad. He was never late for school. He did all of his homework on time, and he generally kept himself out of trouble. And then one day, while walking out of the boys' toilet, Danny accidentally bumped into a teacher named Mr. Carter, sending hot tea all over the front of Carter's nice white shirt. Danny apologized, but Mr. Carter was absolutely livid. Carter acted like he'd done it on purpose and then sent Danny straight to referral, which was even worse than being given straight detention. He then told the school's head teacher that Danny had deliberately spilled a scalding hot drink all over him. And this elevated the seriousness of the incident to a health and safety issue, whereby somebody could have been really hurt. And as a result, the head teacher wanted Danny expelled. Di's parents basically begged the head teacher not to expel him. And in the end, they managed to whittle down the punishment to 2 weeks of hourly after-school detention, including 2 hours on Saturday mornings. Danny said they believed that he hadn't meant to hurt Mr. Carter, but being fully aware of how unfair life could be, they advised him to keep his mouth shut, take the punishment, and put it behind him. Danny's brother, on the other hand, wasn't quite so philosophical about it. Paul, who was almost the whole 3 years older than us, wanted revenge. Although he'd never been personally picked on by him, Paul hated Mr. Carter during his own spell at school, and having his little brother treated so unfairly sent him right around the bend. But while he promised that we'd get Carter back, he told us revenge was a dish best served cold. At the time, I had no idea what he'd meant by that, so Paul explained himself. If we rode our bikes past Mr. Carter's house that very same day and pelted it with 24 rotten eggs, he'd know who it was right away. But wait a couple of months and make him think that you're all good and sorry and all of that, and he'd have no bloody idea who it was. On top of that, Carter would have even less of an idea of who egged his house if we did something on a night of the year when all sorts of stuff like that is happening. That night being mischief. Now, for those that don't know, and to be fair, I didn't really know this myself until I Googled it. Mischief Night is a tradition that stretches back hundreds of years. Historically, it's taken place on different days of the year, depending on which area of the world you're in. But the premise is always the same. The night before some sort of religious festival, kids take to the street to perform acts of mischief. In the distant past, the mischief involved robbing cabbages from nearby farms, but more recently, in places like the United Kingdom and America, kids throw eggs or sometimes whole rolls of toilet paper over houses and trees till they were completely covered. It used to take place on the 30th of April. Then I know at one point in parts of England, it used to happen on the night before Bonfire Night. But these days, on both sides of the Atlantic, the date seems to have settled on the 30th of October, the night before Halloween. And it's this night that Paul picked out for our revenge. Another reason Paul told us to be patient was so he could work out a way of really hurting Mr. Carter. Now, I don't mean physically hurting. Paul was a good lad like his brother, so the thought of actually harming the guy never seriously crossed his mind. But we needed a way of getting back at him for picking on Danny like he did. And that wasn't going to work with just a few eggs or some toilet paper. It was weeks before Paul came up with something. But then, one afternoon, Paul shared his idea with us, and by gum did it seem like a good one. Mr. Carter was into classic cars. Big time, too. So much so that he invested a hell of a lot of money into a first series Jaguar I that he kept locked in his garage. That car was his pride and joy, the thing that got him out of bed in the morning, and we were going to wreck it. It was early October when we started planning, but right from the beginning, we knew it'd be no easy task. We couldn't just break in during the small hours of the morning. Mr. Carter or a neighbor would wake up and call the police. So we discussed some more silent options. We considered slashing the car's leather seats or spray painting Carter as a knob on the side of it, but that just wasn't going to cut it for Paul. He wanted Carter to suffer. I mean really suffer. And a deep, embittered Danny signed off on whatever he came up with. So we got creative. The first phase of the plan involved asking one of Paul's mates to do us a favor, or more like 24 favors, actually. Almost every night for about 3 weeks, Paul's mate, Marvin, would ride over to Mr. Carter's house, and then after knocking on his door really loudly, he'd hop back on his bike and ride off. He'd give us little reports on it, too. How Carter was getting angrier and angrier every time he did it. And by the time Mischief Night came around, Carter had taken to running down the street after frantically pedaling Marvin, screaming that he'd give him a bloody good hiding once he got his hands on him. Now, everything was going according to plan. Or at least according to Paul it was. All we had to do was wait until Mischief Night, and we'd make Mr. Carter suffer big time. And on the morning of the 30th, I was buzzing with excitement. All the kids at the school were asking each other what they were getting up to that night. And both me and Danny had to put on poker faces when we said, not much, just keeping out of trouble. Neither of us had any classes with Mr. Carter, but I saw him in the corridor at one point, and I swear that I felt the color drain from his face as we passed each other. I got into my head that if he saw me looking shifty, he'd know that we were up to something. So I was hugely relieved when 3:15 rolled around and it was time to go home. As me and Danny walked to the bus stop, we went over that evening's plan of action. Paul had everything organized and planned out meticulously. All I had to do was show up at their place at 7 p.m. When I told Danny I was nervous, he said he felt the same way. But he had also thanked me for helping out and told me that I was the best friend he ever had, even if I had been harboring serious doubts. That last line would have obliterated them. And so, needless to say, there was no turning back then. A couple of hours later, all four of us were around the corner from Mr. Carter's house, riding in a group like that with the two older lads. All my nerves were left behind me, and I was keen as mustard to knock 7 shades of crap out of Mr. Carter's old Jag. We hid our bikes down the street behind the car as Marvin snuck up Carter's path. And then, after banging on the front door, Marvin ran back toward the street and climbed on his bike. But then, instead of pedaling off right away, he waited until Carter had opened his front door, and then he shouted, "Catch me if you can, toss spot," and then started pedaling like mad. Carter went berserk. Marvin had told us how angry the knock a DoorDash was making him, but seeing it for myself was something else. He screamed something we couldn't make out and then ran for his car. Not the Jag, but his everyday car. And then, after wildly backing out of his driveway, he sped off down the road in pursuit of Marvin. We were elated. The plan had worked perfectly. But we also knew that we only had about 15 minutes before Carter would return home. Marvin said it got to the point where he'd chase him in his car, and then, after easily escaping pursuit, using the neighborhood's alleyways. Carter would drive up and down looking for him for a while, and we wasted no time in putting on our gloves and running up to Carter's driveway and toward the garage. Paul then took out a towel from his bag, and after Danny held it up against the wall side window, he punched it through so it broke nice and quietly. Paul knocked out the rest of the glass and then laid the towel over the bottom of the frame. And then we climbed inside before someone switched on the light. But when the light came on, there was no bloody car. We couldn't believe it. This was a big open space where the car used to be. But for whatever reason, it just wasn't there. Months of planning had amounted to nothing. And even if we managed to break a few windows or trample his flower beds, it wouldn't be as satisfying as smashing that Jaguar. I remember suggesting that we just leave and maybe break one of Carter's front windows on the way out. Danny said that wasn't a bad idea, but Paul was having none of it. He said there had to be something in that garage that we would break or steal It really get to Mr. Carter, and he wasn't leaving till we found it. Even Danny thought it was a bit much and that we ended up getting caught if we stuck around too long. But Paul had already had something picked out. There seemed to be a footlocker, like the old military kind with a padlock, and as soon as Danny pointed it out, I knew what he was thinking. Inside would be Carter's old Army and Navy stuff, precious artifacts from his time in the forces. He'd be devastated if anything like that went missing. So that's what we were going to take. There were a pair of old rusty boot cutters mounted on a tool rack nearby. And then, after Paul took them down, he and Danny got to work clipping the padlock off the footlocker. I remember how loud the bolt cutters were when they finally cut through. And then, Paul and Danny dropped down, flipped open the lid, and started rummaging through the footlocker's contents. Looking over the shoulders, all I could see were white envelopes. At first, I thought they might have had money in them, seeing as they looked stuffed, but all they contained were pages of handwritten letters. There were a few pieces of jewelry, and Danny stuffed those into his pockets. But then Paul pulled out a framed photograph of a young woman, along with a small glass jar containing a lock of brown hair. I remember thinking the girl must have been Carter's niece or something, because he didn't have a family as far as we knew. But then, after looking at the photo for a few seconds, Paul dropped it back in the locker like it was radioactive. Danny asked him what the matter was, and Paul told him to put the jewelry back immediately. Danny asked why, but Paul just walked over toward the broken window and told us we needed to leave. Danny started giving it loads about not leaving without getting Carter back, but Paul growled a reply of, "No, Danny," to let us know how serious he was. We hopped out of the window, grabbed the towel, and then ran out into the street and towards where we stashed our bikes. The last thing Paul said was, "Follow me and don't stop until I do." And then we rode like hell till Paul finally slowed down. Now, we were all out of breath, legs burning from the wild pedaling we had just done. And me and Danny were still proper confused why Paul had suddenly reacted the way he did. We wanted to know what had scared him so much about a picture of a girl, but it wasn't the girl. It was what happened to her that scared him. Now, like I mentioned, Paul was a couple of years older than us, so there were a few things he remembered, odds and sods that were just before mine and Danny's times. And one of those things involved a young lady going missing on Ickley Moor. He told us there was a big search for her and that her picture had been all over the local papers around the time she went missing. The girl in the photo frame that was in Carter's footlocker looked almost exactly like the girl had gone missing. Danny started arguing the toss, asking his brother if he was sure that it was the same girl, but Paul was positive. He told us how no one had ever found a body. She was only assumed to be dead, but he was absolutely positively 110% sure it was the same girl in the photo, and that lock of hair and those pieces of jewelry had almost certainly belonged to her. I couldn't believe it. As in, I literally couldn't believe what I was hearing. I didn't think Paul was lying or making anything up, but it was also like my brain just couldn't process what I was hearing. I thought there just had to be some kind of mistake, that maybe this missing girl was one of Carter's relatives in some capacity, and what we'd seen was nothing but just some keepsake. But Paul wasn't an idiot, and he wasn't a coward either. He wouldn't have pulled us out of Carter's garbage unless he was deadly serious about something. I just couldn't bring myself to accept what he was suggesting. It only felt truly real once we arrived at a phone box outside of a row of shops and Paul went inside, called 999, and then anonymously reported Carter for what we'd found in his footlocker. He didn't say how we knew that jewelry and that lock of hair were in there, only that he'd seen them with his own eyes. Then, after giving Carter's address, he hung up and we rode off again. And that's when it properly sunk in what had happened that night. The police report made it real. And just like when Danny said, I was his best friend, there was no turning back now. We thought there'd been a ton of police cars outside of Carter's house within a few hours, maybe a helicopter and a TV crew. But all that happened was a police constable knocking at his door, took a look around his garbage, and then just buggered off again, satisfied that it was nothing to concern himself with. It was only then we realized that what was intended as a deeply serious report had been mistaken for some mischief night shenanigans. Breaking into Carter's garage and then into his footlocker had also given him advanced warning that someone had discovered what was potentially his deepest, darkest secret. So, by the time a policeman was having a mooch around his garbage, he'd probably scrubbed the place from top to bottom and rehidden that footlocker if he hadn't disposed of it completely. And in the weeks that followed, I thought Carter was going to be arrested at any moment. I couldn't bring myself to even look in his direction, as I feared that one look at my face and he'd known it was us who broke into his house. Paul kept telling us to be patient again, that investigations took time, and that Carter would be arrested eventually. But he wasn't. Nothing ever happened. Or rather, the only thing that happened is that Carter got away with it. And just after Christmas, once we were all back in school, there was an announcement in the school's assembly. Carter was leaving. Not just at another school somewhere in England, but to teach at some international school in Hong Kong. The head teacher treated it like Carter was moving up in the world, going on some grand adventure to the Orient. Only me, Danny, and Paul, and Marvin knew the real reason Carter was moving. We talked about it once or twice, and Danny mentioned something about extradition. He didn't know the word for it at the time. He just asked about the potential of Hong Kong handing Carter over once his crimes came to light. But then Paul shared his theory on why Carter had picked Hong Kong over just about anywhere else in the world. It might have been an ex-British colony, and it might have still had plenty of English-speaking institutions. But Hong Kong had been handed over to China that previous year. If it was no longer British territory, and since the UK didn't have an extradition treaty with China, Carter wouldn't have to return home. Even if they found a smoking gun on his property, there was nothing the police or government could do to bring him to justice. And the worst part? It was all our fault. By breaking into that footlocker, all we'd done is give him advanced warning. He might have come across her at some point, and if the police raided his house, they'd have found the same thing we did. But any chance of that happening were scuppered the moment that we decided to cut the padlock off. Smash his car and maybe the police find the footlocker while they're following up on a vandalism report. But by making an anonymous report on Mischief Night of all bloody nights, all we'd really done was make sure Carter could escape justice. And to this day, I still feel this deep twinge of shame and regret. Paul had it the worst, what with it being his idea. He got mad and to booze as he got older. and was an out-of-work alcoholic by the time he was 30. People thought he was just a loser, someone who couldn't deal with the everyday working world. But me and Danny, no different because it's the same shame and guilt we only barely managed to fight off that ended up completely consuming him. I grew up in a place called Shallow Water, a little northwest Texas town about 10 miles outside of Lubbock. When I was 19, I had a job at the XFAB plant, and I used to get a ride to work with a couple of coworkers. Every morning, we'd stop at this little coffee place called Hebrews to get some cups of to-go juice. And it was there that I met a girl named Rita. We got to talking about the donuts and which one were our favorites. And then, after confirming she was single, we swapped phone numbers and started texting back and forth. We went on a couple of dates throughout October and toward the end of the month. With Halloween coming up, I asked Rita if she had any plans for it. She said that she was headed to a Halloween party up toward the country club, and that if I wanted to go, I could tag along with her and her friends. Now, I was wild about this girl at the time, and none of my friends had any plans outside of sitting at home, probably playing PUBG. So I figured, why the hell not? I put together a pretty basic ghost face costume, the same thing that I'd worn a couple of years before. And then I took the opportunity to show Rita that I actually had some social skills by winning over her friends. It made for a pretty fun night, at least until Rita went to the bathroom and then came back with this very worried look on her face. She said that her ex had shown up completely out of the blue, too. He was supposed to be away working on some oil rigs out in the Gulf, but apparently there had been a change of plan, and it meant that I needed to get out of there. In short, Rita's ex was an asshole, and if I stuck around, there would 100% be a fight once he worked out who she was with. I didn't want to leave, but I also didn't want to fight that guy. So I said goodbye to Rita and her friends, and then figured out that I could slip out without any issues. But then, right as I'm walking down the driveway of this big old house, I hear someone yelling from behind me saying, "That's right. You get the hell out of here before I kick your ass." Now, I looked over my shoulder to see some angry-looking dickwad being held back by his douchey-looking buddies, and he just kept on yelling stuff at me as I turned out of the driveway and hit the road. I intended on walking back to Shallow Water, which would take a couple of hours, but I didn't mind. I was too obsessed to care about walking all that way, and thoughts of Rita kept me going until my phone suddenly buzzed in my pocket. It was Rita, and she said that her ex was pissed. After starting another fight, he and his buddies had been kicked out of the party. They were mad as hell and intended on catching up with me so they could give me a little ass whooping. Now I had this gut feeling of, uh-oh. And as I realized that they were driving and I was on foot, it was only a matter of time before they caught up with me. I lost my ghost face mask at the party, but I was still wearing that raggedy kind of black gown thing as I started jogging down the side of the hallway. It seems kind of dumb looking back on it, but at the time I couldn't think of anything else that would help. I decided to get home, or at least get out of the area so I could make it harder for Rita's ex and his boys to find me. So there I was, jogging along the side of the highway in my Halloween costume. And every so often, I'm looking over my shoulder at approaching cars thinking, please don't be Rita's ex. And they all keep passing me one by one until one of them slows down right alongside me. And I think, This is it. I turned to look at the car, expecting to see a car full of jerk-offs ready to kick the shit out of me. But it was a lone woman who rolled down her passenger side window and called out to me, asking if I needed a ride. She looked like your typical soccer mom in her SUV and purple sweater, and followed up by saying that she figured if I was running alongside the road, then I most likely needed a ride someplace. And I told her that she was a godsend, that I never needed a ride so much in my entire life. And then, after making sure that she was headed my way, I hopped in the passenger seat and we took off down the road. Now she introduced herself as Deborah and asked why I'd been running down the side of the road in the first place. I didn't know what else to tell her, so I told her the truth. I told her all about Rita, how her ex had shown up at the Halloween party that we were at, and how I was running because she texted me saying he was out to kick my ass. I also tied that into why I was so grateful that she stopped for me. At which point Deborah laughed and told me it was no problem. But she did say that's what I got for dipping my toes into the dating pool. Now, I could not have agreed more, but I didn't agree when she said that I should be finding a nice girl to settle down with. I mean, I agreed with the nice girl part, but settle down and get married at 19? That kind of sounded like a nightmare. Now, I only politely disagreed, and she laughed again like she knew I would. And then we just kept on driving while talking about this and that, and we'd already established that I was headed over to shallow water, and Deborah had said that she was going the same way. So, when she turned off the highway and started heading straight east, I figured that there had been some confusion at first. So I reminded her of where I was headed. She said that she hadn't forgotten. She just had to make a stop at a friend's place on the way back. Since she was giving me a ride out of the kindness of her heart, I wasn't about to complain about the pit stop. So I just kept on with the small talk as we drove down this very dark dirt road. But when she suddenly stopped the car, the mood shifted completely. I asked Deborah why she suddenly stopped, and she didn't reply. She just reached into the compartment of her door. Then the next thing I knew, I had a gun pointed at me. I just froze up at first, partially in fear, partially in complete disbelief. Deborah then tossed a small sack at me, one made of black cloth, and she told me to put it over my head. I thought it was a joke, just a really bad joke. So I told her, this has to be a joke. But Deborah wasn't joking. Not at all. And she said that I could either put the bag over my head or she'd shoot me in the head and call 911 and tell the cops I tried to violate her. Again, I was stunned. It was a wakening nightmare. It had to come out of nowhere. So I just couldn't find the words till she said, "Are you deaf? Put the bag over your head before I shoot you dead." I asked where she was going to take me and what she was going to do with me, but more as an act of defiance, if anything. I knew she wasn't going to tell me. It was all just a way of delaying the inevitable. Then, when Deborah told me one more time to put the bag over my head, I did as I was told. Once my face was covered and I was almost completely blind, Deborah got us moving again. I kept asking where we were going and what she was going to do with me. But whenever she did speak, Deborah only said stuff like, "Shut up, demon. I ain't got ears for none of your lies." And she kept referring to me that way, as a demon. When we stopped the car and she ordered me out, I couldn't see where I was walking, but she kept the gun to my back until I recognized that we'd walked inside someplace. The next thing, she told me to put my arms out and she tied my wrists around some sort of metal support that felt cold on my wrists. After that, she took the hood off, and I could see that I was in a barn. Deborah told me if I did anything funny, she'd kill me when she came back. Then she left the barn for what felt like forever before coming back with what looked like to be her younger daughter or something. She still had that gun pointed at me as she told her kid how I was a demon. And if they both said a prayer, I'd reveal myself as the monster I was. The whole time I was trying to reason with her, telling her I was a good person. And then I said my prayers too, stuff like that. But Deborah kept telling her daughter things like, "Now hear that? Those are the devil's lies. And we don't have ears for the devil's lies, do we, sweetie?" She said that kid trained pretty good. She barely even looked at me. She just kept her eyes on her mama, nodding yes or no whenever she asked a question like, "And you know what we do with demons, don't you, sweetie?" "That's right. We destroy them." Then both of them together started praying. And no matter how much I begged them both to cease some sins, they wouldn't listen. When I got louder, they got louder, until we were all screaming so loud it seemed crazy that no one could hear us. But no one could hear us. And so no one showed up to help me. And when I was done screaming and Deborah was done praying, she told her daughter to look at me and see the demon that's been revealed. That kid saved my life because she took one look at me crying and begging for my life and sobbing and said, "I don't see a demon, Mommy." Now Deborah responded, "Of course you do, sweetie. Look harder." But her kid just shook her head and repeated herself. And I'll never forget the look on that woman's face when she gave me a kind of second look, or like she looked at me for the very first time all over again. She looked like she was studying me, and then she looked very surprised, and then finally she looked very sad. She turned to her kid and said something along the lines of, "Mommy made a mistake." And I joined in. Yes, a mistake, as if that's all that happened. "Everyone makes mistakes. Please let me go. Please let me go." But again, Deborah didn't seem to listen. Her little girl's eyes were fixed on me, all wide and afraid, but glassy, like she was right on the verge of tears, but Deborah didn't look. Not at first. She just kept saying how sorry she was, offering to take me back inside. I had to wait another God knows how long before Deborah showed up again, still holding that gun and with a black bag in her hand again. I felt this deep feeling of relief seeing the bag because I knew that it meant that she was going to drive me someplace again, or maybe walk me someplace. Either way, she wasn't going to shoot me, but that didn't mean that she didn't threaten to. She gave me some big speech about how she was doing God's work out there and how sometimes she made mistakes in identifying demons or devil worshippers. She was very sorry that she put me through all of that, and she also couldn't leave me alone unless I promised not to tell anyone about what she had done. Right after, with either the gun or the black bag on offer, I'd have said just about anything she asked me to. So I promised her. I promised to God that I'd never breathe a word of what happened that night to another living soul. And then Deborah put the bag back on my head, untied my hands, and directed me back towards her car. And the next time she took the bag off my head, we were on a dark stretch of highway that I couldn't identify. Deborah said it was roughly where she picked me up. And as much as I couldn't be sure, I was too relieved to be out of that barn and out of her clutches to give a good goddamn where I was exactly. And before she drove off, she actually said, "God bless you," and explained how God would reward me in heaven if I kept my mouth shut. Well, I didn't keep my mouth shut, and after I walked all the way back to shallow water, I called the county sheriff and filed a report. I knew it wouldn't be an open and shut case, obviously. But the cops got back to me, and the prognosis was probably worse than I thought. Without any witnesses or anything like that, any kind of legal proceeding would be a sort of, he said, she said case. Deborah's version of events was obviously entirely different from mine, but it wasn't just that they were different. They varied wildly. She said that she did the Christian thing of giving me a ride home, and I tried to take advantage after stopping at her home so she could give me a bite to eat. She said that I was drunk, which admittedly I was, and the fact that I'd been partying beforehand would look real bad if it was just put in front of a judge. And then, on the off chance that they did manage to pin charges on her, it might not be anything big like kidnapping. Because if she convinced the court that she was in fear for her life, they might not even convict her for reckless endangerment, and she might walk. And in the end, the best advice the cops could give me was, don't get in cars with any more strangers. And to save myself the stress, I just chose not to press charges. Needless to say, I had one hell of a story to tell Rita, and she thought that it was crazy not to press charges, at least until I explained how it might potentially have my name dragged through the mud. If I tried to get Deborah locked up, which wasn't even her real name, by the way, she would make the counterclaim that I was just some drunk pervert who tried attacking her after she showed me kindness. This was right on the cusp of stuff like MySpace getting big too. So, the idea that people could lock me up and assume that I was some kind of predator? That would be a whole second nightmare I had the power to avoid. Sometimes I regret it, especially when I think about her doing the same thing to other people, because I get a sick feeling in my stomach that some people didn't get to walk away. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these true creepy Halloween stories. I would like to take a moment and acknowledge the rest of the membership of Back to Ashes. Thank you all for your dedication and for continuously pushing me harder and harder to make sure that the vocal melatonin doesn't stop, because you are the reason that this happens. As I always like to say, without you, I wouldn't have a voice, this channel would not exist, and of course I would be sitting here talking to myself. So thank you very much. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed this collection. In the meantime, please stay vigilant and please take care of yourselves. I'll be reading to you soon. Peace, love, and light to you all.